Hi guys, it's Miss Minx, and I'm going to go over the review for your experimental design vocabulary quiz. So you are going to retake this tomorrow, but in the meantime, you are going to watch this video and then fill in the accompanying sheet, which goes hand in hand with it. So this is what the sheet will look like. If you notice, it has blanks that you will fill in, which will be in this video as a part of the slideshow I'm going to cover. Review of experimental design vocabulary. So there are 14 vocabulary words. They are bolded, underlined, and in all caps when they are used in this presentation. I would suggest that not only do you fill in the sheet, but you use it to study the vocabulary and you also study the previous test that you took. Ms. Minks asked the following experimental question. How does changing the temperature of ketchup affect the distance it will move down a whiteboard in 15 seconds? 3 of her students give the following responses. Cora: based on what I know about ketchup from using it in the past, I think it will go further if it is hotter. John: if the temperature of ketchup is decreased, then the distance it travels will increase. Dixon: ketchup is gross, so it doesn't really matter. One of the responses is an opinion, one is an inference, and one is a hypothesis. Opinion: a personal belief or judgment that is not founded on proof or certainty. By the way, if you notice on the sheet that you have that accompanies this, the words that are bolded, emboldened, are the same ones that are the blanks that you fill in. Inference: an assumption about an object or event based on observations. Hypothesis: a statement of a possible relationship between the independent and dependent variables. It's a prediction based on research, prior knowledge, and experiences. Please feel free to pause this video so that you can fill in the blanks as you go along and study a little bit. Hint: an if-then statement is the format of a hypothesis. So on your sheet, you will need to decide which student wrote the opinion, which student wrote the inference, and which student wrote a hypothesis. So go ahead and review that and fill in your answers. Pause this and then come back when you're done. In an experiment, there are things you must keep the same the whole time and for each test. This is called the constant. Constant: any factor in an experiment that is not allowed to change to prevent it from affecting the outcome and to make sure your results are fair and reliable. Here are 3 examples of constants from the ketchup race. The 15-second timer was a constant. The brand of ketchup was a constant. The amount of ketchup was a constant. On your paper, you will have to determine what another constant would be in the ketchup race, and you just circle your answer. There's a A, B, and a C, and really think it through. Experiments also have things that do change, which are called variables. Variable: any factor that can be changed during an experiment. Independent variable: the factor scientists test in an experiment and purposely change. Dependent variable: scientists measure and observe this to collect data to see if it responded to the purposely changed variable. Here are the variables from the ketchup race. The independent variable: the temperature of the ketchup. We purposely chose different temperatures: hot, cold, and room temperature. The dependent variable: the distance the ketchup traveled. This was what we observed and measured after we changed the temperature. So this is what responded to the independent variable, which was the temperature. During an experiment, it is best to have a non experimental group called the control to compare your experimental data to. Control, a group or sample that is used as a standard of comparison. This is the natural state, which is used as a baseline. For example, in the ketchup race, we could have decided that the cold temperature of ketchup was the control, since a lot of people keep their ketchup in the refrigerator. Then, after we measured how far the cold ketchup went in 15 seconds, we would have used that as a baseline to compare the other two temperatures to. So, number 19 on your paper asks, why would we pick the cold temperature of ketchup as a control instead of hot? Basically, just go back and listen to what I just said, or you can read it on the slide. When you do an experiment, you want to do several tests so that you get more accurate results. These are called repeated trials. Repeated trials, used to reduce the effects of chance errors, you should average them. For example, during the Penny Lab, you did 4 repeated trials for your control group, which had no soap added to the water, and 4 repeated trials for your experimental group. Soap was added to the water. After you perform a test, then you write down how the dependent variable changed. You write down your observations by describing what you saw and heard, and you write down your measurements. These observations and measurements are your data, and you can organize them in tables and graphs. Data, facts and figures collected in an experiment, displayed in tables and graphs. Types of data, qualitative data, observations made with your senses, instead of measurements and numbers. Quantitative data, observations in number form, made by collecting measurements. For example, qualitative means the quality of something, like how the ketchup looked runny or viscous. Quantitative means the quantity or to quantify numbers, like how the ketchup traveled 15 centimeters. So a lot of students are getting those two confused. Qualitative means the quality of something or like characteristics, using your senses without having to measure anything. Where quantitative is mathematical in some way, either you're counting or you're measuring. There's numbers involved. Remember, a conclusion has 2 parts. Whether the data supported or failed to support your hypothesis, an explanation of how the independent variable affected the dependent variable, which is what caused your results. Conclusion, a written summary of your results and what you learned during your experiment. So John's original hypothesis was if the temperature of ketchup is decreased, then the distance it travels will increase. So he thought if the temperature was cooler, that it would actually travel further. So, based on John's hypothesis above, if his results showed that as the temperature decreased, the distance of the ketchup traveled also decreased, what should he include in his conclusion? And so you will be writing this down on your paper. So he would say something like, my results did not support my hypothesis because as the temperature of ketchup increased, the distance it traveled also increased. So I would encourage you to study this paper along with your original test and just make sure you are very familiar with these vocabulary words for tomorrow. You could make flashcards or you could go on Quizlet and quiz yourself. Just make sure you are really mindful about learning these words. Just looking at them alone or reading over them alone will not be enough to help you learn them. You have to actually utilize them in some way. So I hope this helps and good luck.